Great. So welcome everybody. My name is Augie Gabrielli, and I am a water education coordinator with the city of Boise and also a regional leader for the Earth to Sky program. And so this is our second seminar of the Ignite series. Actually, it's technically our third, but the second one got postponed until next week. So we're super happy you guys could all make it to the seminar series and join us for our awesome presentation today. I just really quickly wanted to plug and remind everyone that Ignite is brought to you by the city of Boise, the Boise Watershed Educational Center, the University of Idaho Confluence Lab, and we are also a proud affiliate with the Earth to Sky Partnership, which is a group dedicated to connecting educators, communicators, scientists, all sorts of people with resources from NASA, from the National Park Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So if you're interested in learning more about the Earth to Sky program, Kayla is going to put a link in the chat to their website, and you can learn a little bit more about their national program. But we also are kind of creating an Earth to Sky community of practice here in Boise. And if you are interested in joining that and getting some more local opportunities, relative to the state of Idaho, feel free to send us your contact information, whether you want to send it to email or just put it in the chat, and we'll make sure you're on that list so that you can stay up to date on upcoming events. And then I am going to pass it off to Tristan if she's here. If she's not, I will continue talking, as we'll get more of me.
Go for it, Augie, if you want to talk about the schedule.
All right. So today's schedule is pretty simple. It's kind of similar to last week. We're going to, we're almost done with introductions. We're going to pass it off to blazing the trail. How do we learn to live with fire in Idaho? And we're going to talk about that. So we're super excited about that. We'll have a Q&A at the end of that presentation. And then our goals for this series and for today's presentation are to engage Idaho environmental educators and interpreters with leading edge fire and climate science that is applicable to place-based education in Idaho, and then also to support and strengthen the work of climate communicators in Idaho and create a community of practice that includes both educators and scientists. So yeah, I'll pass it off to Kayla, and I will stop that.
Great, thanks, Augie. And thank you all for being here today. I'm Kayla Bordelon. I'm one of the Idaho regional leaders for the Earth to Sky Partnership, and I'm a PhD student studying storytelling in fire science education at the University of Idaho. So I'm just going to make a quick couple of notes about technology. We are recording today's session, and I'm going to turn on the automatic closed captioning, which I forgot to do somewhere. Well, I'll find that. But you can hide it by clicking the CC button at the bottom when it's on. And we definitely encourage discussion. I think Heather has planned to do a lot of discussion throughout her presentation. Just keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking. And I will try to help with tech issues, and you can message me in the chat or directly. So with that, I'm going to introduce our presenter for today, Heather Heward. She's a faculty member in Forest Resources, Rangeland Ecology and Management, and Natural Resources here at the University of Idaho. And she's also the founder and chair of the new Idaho Prescribed Fire Council. Woohoo! And I think she's going to share a bit about that today. And Heather also has a decade of experience on the ground as a wildland firefighter, or nearly a decade, I think. And I put this photo up here to celebrate a recent award that Heather got. She is the 2021 Outstanding Instructor in the College of Natural Resources here at University of Idaho. So congratulations, Heather.
Thank you.
And great, I'll just go ahead and turn it over to you to share your screen.
Wonderful. All right. Yes, so thank you for the introduction. I've been involved in wildland fire since 2002, and I did seasonal wildland fire for 8 seasons, and then went into the business of growing a family and prescribed burning, sometimes at the same time. So I go way back with fire. My father was a fire practitioner in Washington, and I learned from an early age that the smell of smoke meant that my father was back from fire camp and had Snickers bars, which we didn't get a lot as a kid. So fire from early on meant delicious, and that's still what it means today to me. So this idea of building relationships with fire in Idaho, one of the things that we're going to start with as a group is this common ground that we all have, which is that we are all human beings on the earth. And when we are human beings on the earth, we have some kind of relationship with fire, even though we don't know exactly what that is, or our relationships might be pretty different. So I've got a t-shirt in my fire cache that says, fire is the answer. And on the other side, it says, what was the question? And, obviously I'm probably picking up, I'm a big fan of fire, and fire is the answer to a lot of things, but not every question, perhaps. So it's important to be able to have the tools to distinguish what is the question that fire is the answer to, and how can we use it to answer that question. So what I'd like you to do is go to menti.com, and you can enter this code. That little Zoom bar is in the way of me copying and pasting that. But if we could copy and paste that into there we go, I can do that, into the chat. And then you can enter that code. Oh, there it is. Oh, thank you for doing that. Yep. All right. So we'll go to menti.com, and I'm going to have you answer 2 of these questions. So let me get out of my presentation mode here. All right. So what I'd like you to enter here is what your relationship with fire is. What are the 3 words that you think of when you think of fire? And that'll you've alluded to that in the pre-poll here. But what this is a word cloud, if you've not seen these before, and we'll start to see what similarities we all have as far as the words that come to mind when we think of fire. And those will come out as larger words. All right. Hot, destructive, regenerative, camping, forest, scary. Tool, heat, loss. Frightening. Cleansing, helpful, beneficial, controversy. Tradition, morels. Forest. Scary, loss, destructive, heat, regeneration, education, important, camping, overwhelming, idiots, life, good, cycle, tool, stressful, good. Regenerative, hot, scary, those are the ones that are standing out there. Carbon, important, powerful, calming, tense. Lots of wonderful words here to describe fire. The wonderful thing about all these words is that all of them are very true, and they can be true even if they're very different. I think that one of the reasons that I like fire so much is that it scares me, and that I can learn to work with it and understand it so that I can use it better. And there's a line, an old proverb, I suppose you'd call it, that fire is a good servant but a bad master. And when it is the one that's controlling you, then it is very scary. Very good. All right, so let's move on to the next question here, which is, what influences your opinion of fire the most? So I believe that you can put these and drag these into order, and then we'll just see where these opinions of fire come from. Does not seem to be showing the results there. Try and enter back into that. Oh, there the results are. All right. So scientific literature, mostly news, personal experience, others' experiences. Okay. Whenever I have an opinion on something, I like to think about where that opinion comes from and why it is there. How did it form? Hold on, I've got a child here. Well, that's how it goes these days, right, guys? All right, stand by 1 second.
I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, Heather. Zoom moment.
That's right. All right, thank you. Back to the presentation. Moon, will you close the door, please? Okay. Okay. All righty. Back to the screen sharing. Okay, so great results there. And let's think about this a little bit more, about how our relationship with fire has changed over time. So this is obviously this is a painting. I don't remember when this painting was done, but this is a painting that's showing the Native American use of fire as a cultural practice that really served them. Fire served to promote the species that they needed for food and for their tools and for their baby carriers and all these things. It promoted open forests so you could see while you're hunting. They would often burn an area later in the fall when it was still dry, knowing that winter would come eventually, and they would just light whole hillsides on fire. And then the next year they would come and they would reap the benefits of the results of that fire. And so we often talk about fire in a a natural state, but the reality is that we don't really know what is natural, because humans have been manipulating fire for a very long time. So what we probably more accurately represent our change in fire policy is with European settlement. When we have more people, then you have more impact from that fire. And this piece of propaganda was a piece of lots of propaganda from the middle of the 20th century, specifically around World War II. I didn't include some of the more offensive images because they are really offensive with equating the use of fire to aiding the enemies that we had in that war. And so this middle picture really just demonstrates the fear that started to develop, and fire was, instead of being seen as something that would benefit our resources and our needs, it was something that would destroy them. Fire would take away our valuable timber, and that removal of timber would mean a loss of revenue and a loss of productivity. And so then we come to events of today. We see images like the one on the right that are incredibly terrifying. A whole town being burned up by a wildfire is just an awful scene. And our relationship with fire as it's evolved has become one of awe and use and comfort and providing, to one of fear. We have a lot of fear behind it now. So what I'd like to talk about is what the impacts of this change are. And I'm going to describe this to you in terms of credit card debt. And as I tell you this as an analogy, I'm coming from the position of you as an individual human being with a perception of fire, and what that, how that perception of fire can be influenced. I'm not trying to change your opinions, but more importantly, I'm talking to you as people who are educators, who are teaching other people about the concepts of fire and how we can communicate to them in a way that they understand, so that they can know the impacts of our current fire policy. So credit card debt is the analogy that I find most helpful to describe this. We can all understand that if you have $10,000 of credit card debt and you earn $1,000 of interest each year, and when you pay $100 each year on that credit card debt, you are never going to be out of debt. Your credit card debt is going to increase significantly each year because all you are doing is paying 1/10 of the interest that you are accruing on that credit card. Well, our fuels are the same story. So this is a picture of a private landowner's residence here in the Moscow area, and they have hired my student club to come in and thin this area. And what you see is credit card debt. You see interest. This little Douglas fir right here is what's called interest. And this Douglas fir, each year it's not cut, is going to continue to grow. And the other Douglas firs that are underneath it are going to continue to grow and accumulate. And you have an increase in the amount of fuel that is on this site. This particular site was a traditionally ponderosa pine dominated stand, very grassy, very open. And now it's being encroached by Douglas fir because that's what normally happens. If you don't have a disturbance, then you get the next thing in the succession pathway. And so we have across our country an enormous amount of debt, fuels debt, and we are not paying very much into that bucket each year. And because of that lack of payment, we will continue to have significantly high severity fires that are going to remove these ponderosa pines, which would normally withstand these high intensity fires, but they can't because there's just too much stuff there to be able to get through that. And we'll talk about what to do about that next. So this is just another image. This image comes from a web page called putfiretowork.org. And if we could throw that in the chat by chance, that'd be awesome. So putfiretowork.org is a web page that was put together by the Washington Prescribed Fire Council. And what's available on that web page is a lot of resources to help people understand and just communicate about fire. So what this shows, we've got 69% high intensity fires historically. Now we've got 36% high intensity fires. And that is a lot because of this accumulation of fuels that we've seen over time due to fire suppression. So what do we do about it? Well, in the sense of credit card debt, you cut the credit card, right? You get that down. And I like this image because what you do about it in the sense of fuels is you also cut them down. So this is a picture of a student group with the Student Association for Fire Ecology on campus. And this is another private landowner nearby that had a significant accumulation of fuel and has hired the students to come in and cut and stack and then burn these piles to remove those fuels. And the tools that you use to remove those fuels are really diverse. So there's lots of different ways you can remove those fuels. One of them is with fire, one of them is with cutting, one of them is with grazing. There's all kinds of different tools you can use to pay that debt. So what can we do? What else can we do about it? And thinking big here. So what we can do about this when we think really large scale.
Mom,
I'll stand by.
See you.
Oh my goodness, there we go. All right, so we can think really clearly about like, oh, well, yeah, I could treat the area in my backyard. But when we're talking about a big debt, we have to think much bigger. So I have this is an image from the Payette National Forest, and this is a large scale burn operation. And so I'm going to let's see, get my presentation smaller here. And I'm going to share a link with you to this presentation. And I won't go and play the video right now, but you can watch this on your own time. And it's just a 3-minute video that demonstrates the what it looks like to do a landscape scale fire. And so the general pattern that they take place here is they do a lot of what these Native Americans might have done in these areas, which is they go into areas in the early spring, like this weekend. Another burn just like this is planned this weekend that I'll be attending. And they will go in and they'll use helicopters to put fire down on the ground. And the only places that will burn are the places that are available. And those places that are available are those ponderosa pine understories. The places that will not burn are the thicker fir habitat, the Douglas fir, those like fluffier trees. Well, so then they can go in the summertime and they can put additional fire down on the ground. And because those areas that were burned in the spring are all burned up and black, the trees are alive, but the understory is all burned, then you have these patches of heavier fuels where you can get your higher fire behavior, and you can remove that fuel component and reduces your fuel loading significantly. So we're seeing lots of creative tools being used on the management side to get 5,000 to 20,000 acres of areas treated, we call that. And just a word on that idea of a prescription. If we're not feeling well, we go to the doctor to get some medicine, get some treatment. But if we we get what's called a prescription. And if our forests and our rangelands aren't feeling well, we also need to go to the doctor. In this case, the doctor is the land manager who has some significant experience in the area, and they can help us create a prescription for this area to get it back healthy again. So there's various different scales. Again, this is also from the Put Fire to Work webpage, where we've got scalable, having local level, management level, and landscape level. And we need to be working at all scales. And when we're working at the local scale, we recognize that in order to have an impact on the potential fire behavior, let's say around your home, it really does need to be a community effort. If we go about it home by home, then we are not going to have the impact that we would like to on reducing that fire hazard. So I want to open it up to some vocal discussion here about what have been some of the impacts of fire in your communities and what are some possible solutions. So go ahead and unmute yourself if you're ready to share something about those impacts to your communities and possible solutions.
Hello, my name is Cassidy. I'm here in Boise. I'm sure most of you know, like a couple years ago about like the Table Rock fire. So that one was obviously like human caused and not controlled. And that impact of uncontrolled loose fire definitely was devastating to our community. And I think obviously that gives all fire, kind of a bad rep, because when we think of fire, we usually think of like the devastating side of it. So I feel like not only did it impact our community, like, like we lost houses and that kind of thing, but it can also kind of warp our sense of how we view fire. And I think possible solutions to that is kind of what you guys are doing, is just educating that there are pros and cons to fire. And as long as it's done safely and controlled, it can be good, but that it can also be dangerous in the wrong hand.
And at the wrong time. Yeah, absolutely. Good. Others?
Hi there. My name's Amy, and I'm actually one of Augie's co-workers. And I was just remembering a fire, and Augie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or Cindy, but I don't think it was related to the Table Rock fire, but it was in Southeast Boise, up on the ridge over by the Simplot sports complex, and I believe 4 or 5 homes burned, and somebody actually died in those fires. And and so I just kind of, when I think of that, I just think of the tragedy, obviously, not only loss of life, but loss of property. And if I remember right, I think that was actually started by lightning. And then so as far as possible solutions with that, I guess if you're living, your home is near a place that is close to foothills or areas that would burn, that's when I think you're really looking into the vegetative buffer or whatever you can do to protect, structures from those fires impacting your property.
Absolutely. Good. Others?
Hi, I'm Michelle, and I work with Project Learning Tree and the Forest Products Commission, and I'm remembering the 8th Street fire that happened in 1996 in Boise. up in the foothills, and it was started on a nearly 100-degree day when someone was firing a tracer bullet out into the foothills area and started this fire. And for quite a long time after that, we lived with the threat of what would happen if there was a big rain event. And, there were all these evacuation plans and new alarms put in all over the north end of Boise. And you had to have your flood plan all figured out, what you were going to do if it rained and where you were going to meet your family up in the bench and all kinds of things like that. So it was a hugely disruptive thing from one person's bad decision. And so I guess, one thing would just be more education and trying not to have people make such bad decisions, be more mindful.
Absolutely. Good. Others?
Hi there. My name's Ellen, and I live in Mountain Home. I'm a teacher, and I teach 7th and 8th grade. And my big concern is every year, pretty much annually, we, in the summertime, watch the fires start. Every time there's a lightning storm, go back out in the backyard and see where the fires are going to be. And my big concern is the habitat. The sagebrush steppe is such an endangered area, and with a variety of different animals, and those sagebrush grow back really, really slowly. And so, that's a big concern. I think in this area, it's not a timber issue, but that I worry about the sagebrush habitat. And I don't know what the solution is there. I know like BLM works to replant and things like that, but other than that.
It is very challenging. Yes. We'll talk more about that later as well. It is difficult when you have competing needs in an ecosystem, and they are exclusive of each other, and they've existed forever for a long time, but there's just less of the habitat there. There's less space for both to exist together. And how can we manage it when we know that ignitions are going to happen? Good. Other thoughts?
My name's Beth. I live in McCall. I work for Moss, but I spent a lot of time on the Middle Fork of the Salmon, and my partner's a guide out there. So I think I have a not as city-oriented mentality when it comes to fire, because I think a lot of what I think of is in the Frank Church, where a lot of those fires are just let to burn, and cause pretty large debris flows into the Middle Fork and its tributaries, and cause new rapids, and a pretty constant and consistent form of disturbance in that area. Certainly one that has been impacted over generations of, there has been human influence in that area, and climatic influence, but more of it's just something that happens all the time, and something that the river guides at least plan for, and is kind of an exciting thing when there are new rapids in the river too.
Yes. Yeah. So let's dig into this a little bit, this idea of wildfire. So I mentioned this credit card debt, and $100 when you have $1,000 in interest, that's what we can do with prescribed burn. We just can't even touch what we've got going on as far as fuel accumulation in those areas that are impacted by fuel accumulation. The only way that we can really make this credit card debt go away is with the use of wildfire. And that seems crazy and scary, but what we are trying to communicate, and honestly, as practitioners, we are doing a terrible job at communicating with the public about this. We can't even decide what the heck to call this thing. We used to call it fire use, and now all we can call it is the thing we used to call fire use. And what fire use is the ability to have a wildfire that occurs in an area that is remote. Doesn't have a lot of resources at risk. The conditions of the environment are such where those fires are going to occur under relatively mild conditions. There's going to be torching, there's going to be those things, but it's not going to be a huge blowout fire. And then you have a wildfire that treats, in your prescription, it treats thousands of acres for free. So wonderful. But there are a lot of risks to doing that, as you could imagine, because, well, the weather is variable, as you could, you would know to look at your forecast today and say the winds are going to come from the northwest and be like, well, maybe. And that's really hard to predict where fires are going to go. And so we do our best with lots of long-term modeling to see where things are going to go. But figuring out how best to communicate to the public about a wildfire that was intentionally allowed to burn. And then most of the time, nothing happens. Super chill. Sometimes they don't even get big. They're just super, super small scale. But every once in a while, those fires that were allowed to burn are have an impact. And when the public hears about the results, like, oh, well, they could have put that fire out, but they didn't. The story, and often we're not even backed up by our agencies, the story isn't like, well, we're really trying to do good here. It's often like, yeah, that was a malpractice or something. So it's a challenging thing to manage for, but it, you know, if there's a mission that I'm on at all, is to try and figure out a way to communicate that message to people, that there is fire that is going to serve us and there's fire that isn't, and we're going to try our darndest to put those fires out that aren't going to serve us. But the tricky part is that the fires that are going to get big are going to get big because they're burning under conditions that we can't control. We also know from science that when fires are to this point where they're so big that we can't control them, that we try and we kill people, and that's not where we should be. But we have a public that expects us to be doing our hardest work during those times, and that's when we're the least effective. And so how can we find that balance? And some places like Spain, there's some cool stuff that's happening in Spain with people, them communicating really closely with their public and saying, hey, look, this fire is ripping towards your community and we're not even going to touch it because we can't. We just know we're not effective. Get out of the way. And then we'll come back a couple days later and do something about it then. And I can't imagine how that's going to go over in like a big, you know, Boise or, you know, even just smaller towns, you know, like you're like, well, good luck. You know, we'll be back in a couple days. But how could we start to have those conversations? A resource that I'd like to share with you in the chat there is called Fireworks. And some of you might be interested in checking this out. This is approved K-12 approved curriculum that would fit into your science classroom stuff. So it's been vetted through that process with the intent of getting fire education in the classrooms. And it's got some great lessons. I did a couple years ago, I had my students teaching in K-12 just these little lessons like, you know, jelly beans and toothpicks to show the fire triangle and whatever. There's lots of cool ideas in there. So please check that out as well. All right, so I'm going to get back to presentation. I think I've got another Miro for you here. Oh, and not quite yet. So is fire always the answer? This is a picture of a prescribed burn in sagebrush. And so this gets to that question of how do we manage for something like sage grouse when you've got a fire that removes this habitat, and it takes a long time for sagebrush to regenerate. And something to think about when we think about sagebrush and fire is what was sagebrush's normal relationship or historic relationship with fire. We understand that it had relatively infrequent fires, let's say 50 to 150 years between fires, and that varies depending on where you were. So it's relatively infrequent, and it took about that long. Well, I don't know at what age sagebrush create viable seed, but let's say it takes 20 years or something. And so if you have fire more frequent than 20 years, then you no longer have an established seed source. And most sagebrush species, they reestablish from fire through seed. And if you don't have access to a mature sagebrush, then you are just stuck with like the slow roll of like from the next plant in. And when we have the increase in invasive species, as we are seeing in the Great Basin, then you have something that connects the dots. What was a limiter in the past in these areas was fuel. And now there is more fuel because of these species that have moved in that are able to grow very readily in the dry climate that's there. And so you have a fuel source that's now connected the dots, where you wouldn't have had a fire every 20 years in the past because there wasn't enough fuel to go from one bush to the next. Now you have more fuel that's connecting those dots. You add to that people dragging chains behind their trucks, you know, or like cigarette butts or whatever, like the increased ignition source. You have increased ignitions, increased fuels through cheatgrass. And things like cheatgrass are really difficult because I'm not going to lie to you and say that fire is going to fix the cheatgrass problem, because to be honest, if you do it at the wrong time, you're just going to make it worse. And so we need to have more knowledge about how fire impacts invasive species specifically. What time of year should we be burning these areas to impact the invasive species? Should we be burning and herbicide? And what combination, and how often should we do that? And so there's a lot of work that's being done and needs to be done in this area, but it is a challenging problem. And indeed, I would call it a wicked problem, which is one that doesn't really have a good solution. And we kind of just have to do the best we can with what we've got. So let's go back to that. So again, the Miro code there is in the chat. So you can go back there. And I want to get some ideas from you about what are the barriers to using fire as a tool in Idaho. So let's do this word cloud again to talk about what those barriers are. Fear and funding. Yeah. Fear, that's definitely a 4-letter word that definitely gets in our way. That's for sure. Public perception of smoke. Oh, there's lots of things here that you educators can absolutely help with. Public perception and education, not knowledge, need more data. Ignorance, scientific literacy, public fear, public resistance, public perception. Misconceptions. One of the things that we find in fire is that we have a perception of the public's perception. We perceive that they are not into fire. And that might be the case sometimes, but it's actually less the case than we think that it is. We often hold ourselves back from approaching the public with big fire-related things because we are afraid that they are afraid. And what approach would be more productive is approaching the public with respect and believing that they can be taught. And we, again, not going in and saying, I'm going to change your opinion. But I think we do a disservice to our public by thinking that they can't overcome some of the things through our own, good quality teaching of them. Good. All right. So absolutely, funding is huge. We get these projects done when we have the funding to do so. And the funding is, as we've learned recently, very tied to our political situation in our country. And there was a significant impact on the completion of the work that's been done because of funding. And because of the large scale events that occurred last year, there's a wave of more funding right now. But people that have been in this business a long time don't trust these waves of increased funding. They're like fads, and you don't quite believe that it's going to continue on. And so people are a little bit gun shy about hiring the other people that they need because they don't want to have to fire them in 2 years. And so how do we manage that? How do we get some consistent action across the board? Because this is not a one-time fix. We're talking about fixes that are actions that need to be in place for a very long time. All right. So in conclusion, I want to share with you some additional resources or places that are available for you to turn to for information and even participate in. So the first one is the Idaho Prescribed Fire Council. So as was mentioned, I'm the founder and chair of the Idaho Prescribed Fire Council. Council. We just started this December. We approved our bylaws in December, and we had an advisory board meeting this morning. We're just trying to get it rolling. And the hope behind our advisory board is that, our Prescribed Fire Council, is that we come together and bring together the resources that are needed in Idaho to understand and to utilize fire in a safe and effective way. And anybody can be a member of the Idaho Prescribed Fire Council. If you go to, I'll put this in the chat as well. If you go to www.idaho-rxfire.org. You can sign up on the sign-up sheet. We're going to have a 2-hour meeting in May just to get things kicked off. And we would love to have the participation of more people that are just community members out there. Idaho Firewise is a group that Idaho Prescribed Fire Council is going to partner with. And there's a lot of resources on the Idaho Firewise webpage as well to educate landowners specifically about how to treat around their homes so that they can reduce the likelihood of ignition. There is this idea of a fire adapted community is pretty cool. And so you can apply for grants as a community to be able to get help financial help to be able to treat your community. As I said, treating one house by one house is is not very efficient. And unless we have a strategic plan for the community, it doesn't do a lot of good either. So coming together for those resources is important. And then I mentioned already this webpage of Putting Fire to Work, and they have several PSAs. And so there's the Put Fire to Work webpage, but then also the Washington Prescribed Fire Council has some really good resources. And prescribed fire councils in general, there's many across the nation, and the intent of these prescribed fire councils is really to provide a platform for people to discuss prescribed fire and how we can utilize that and have some impact on legislation in the state. One of the keystone pieces of a lot of prescribed fire councils is the development of what's called a certified burner program, where instead of having to go through the lengthy and rigorous federal system for becoming a certified prescribed burn practitioner, you can go through training and get experience and become a certified burner, where you can effectively use prescribed fire on your own land. And then what we need to make sure in the state is that we have protection for the people that are doing that, so that they are protected under certain negligence laws, to say, if you're following all of the best operating procedures, standard operating procedures, then you will be have some protection from the state, and that will protect people from the fear that they have about using fire, because it can be really scary if you're using it on your land. So with that, I would like to open the floor for any questions that you've got.
And if people have questions that they want to add to the chat as well, feel free to do that.
Heather, one thing that I've noticed in talking to folks in rural Idaho that have experienced loss from wildfire, like loss of homes or just evacuations, is that they are, when they smell smoke, they get worried. And they talk about smoke as kind of a trigger. What suggestions do you have for educators as we start kind of trying to reframe what smoke means in a prescribed fire situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I find it interesting. I had this side story. It'll relate. Don't worry about it. So near me, there's this town. It's called Lewiston, and if you've been to Lewiston, it has a smell. There's like a paper mill, and you like go down there, and you're like, man, what is that smell, right? And it's kind of gross. You get used to it when you're down there, but for a long time, I felt the same way. And then I got a Costco card membership, and I was going down to Costco with my kids, and it was always so fun. I loved it. And then I found one day I went to Costco, and I was going to drive down the grid, and I smelled the smell in Lewiston, and it smelled good to me, and it brought me a smile. And the smell did not change, but my experience had changed with the smell. And the smell meant fun and a really good piece of pizza, some like creative snacks, right? And so the only thing we can really do there is give people different experiences that will reset their gut reaction, and not to fight what they've got, because that's one thing that we like bang our head against the wall doing, like, no, you don't need to be afraid. Don't be afraid. No, totally be afraid. You want to be afraid? Totally be afraid. How about you come out to this prescribed burn with me? And really the way that I would like to approach this more is fire effects, because it's going to be a hard sell to be like, look, it's a hot, big flame. That's good, right? It's good. Trust me, it's good. I don't think you're going to sell people on that. What you're going to sell people on, and what's actually easier to get them to, is going to areas that have burned and looking at the effects and being like, you know how that looked like it was totally nuked? A year later, it's looking pretty awesome, looking pretty good. And here's an area that burned, that had a lot of fuel in it, was very overloaded. And here's an area that had been thinned recently. Wow, that area that had been thinned, it's looking really beautiful. Look at that prescribed burn. And as practitioners, as fire practitioners, we have an opportunity to bring people out to stuff like that. And as educators, you have an opportunity to ask about it, because they would be happy to take you. So it's like, you know, they're thrilled to show off their projects that they get to do. And those are, you don't need any special equipment, you just go out there and look at these burns. And with students, I don't know what grades you teach or whatever, but man, find out about a burn and go out there with your rulers every week or something and measure the stuff that comes up, or go out to a place that burned 4 years ago and say, remember what that news, like here's a newsreel from that. Look at it now, it's looking pretty good. And that's how we start to change those perceptions.
Thanks.
Other questions?
Looks
I have a
like
question.
Oh, go ahead, Ellen.
Oh, sorry. So in Idaho, environmental issues are often quite politicized. And where does the idea of prescribed burns being, a really healthy, positive option kind of land on the political spectrum?
Yeah. So as a leader of a prescribed fire group, we're like, I guess we should get insurance so that if people start burning their property and they say that we told them to, that we don't but that's the unfortunate part about the world, is that you propose anything that could promote someone to do something dangerous and all of a sudden it's your fault, and so you don't want to do it at all. And that's where fire lands often, because people don't want to be the one that sticks their neck out and says, absolutely, fire is good, we need to use it correctly, but it's got a place and it's a wonderful tool, it's a part of nature, we can't avoid it. But we need people that have, and people aren't going to do that unless they have confidence, and you don't have confidence unless you have experience. And so that goes back to that, like, how do we get people that experience? Got to bring them out and show them the cool things that we're doing, and they have to talk to more people that have that confidence in the tool. And then we got to fix our political system or our legal system a little bit to have some protection of those people. And that's a lot of the states that don't have that just haven't addressed it. So the ideal strategy in a state would be gross negligence, which means that you really have to show that you really did, like, you were very grossly negligent to mess that up. Because otherwise we have people that are too afraid legally to say anything. But it can be tricky because it does. There's so many sound bites that come out, and you take a sound bite from someone that said fire's good, and you're like, and you just burned my house down, thanks a lot. You're like, that's totally not my fault. It's tricky. Someone asked age that students can start to see fire ecology. So you saw that was my 4-year-old that was back there. So I have some friends that sent me, as a thank you for teaching a class, they sent me a bunch of Smokey Bear stuff, and I was like, Smokey Bear. I've got this mixed relationship with Smokey Bear because he is a super effective teacher. And for some reason, the kids, like my 4-year-old, was like all about like Smokey Bear. And all of a sudden at dinner, she's like, fire is bad, it's too hot. I'm like, what? Who's feeding you this garbage? So we had a great lesson. I'm like, yeah. And, I was like explaining how fire is at the right time. And it's like it vacuums the floor. It's like vacuuming those things up. And I think very, very young, we can start to teach our kids this, and not to like sell them on something, but just like anything in life where we get to teach them that there's balance and middle ground, and how can we find that balance? And then it just leaves their brains open to hearing another side when they're older, and bringing them out and seeing some cool places, and just have that different feeling with it, and give them candy bars at the same time. That helps. Let's see. Young children can learn to think about, let's see. Yeah. So yeah, learning to think about things like candles and campfire, and how to be safe with it, right? How to give fire the respect that it needs, because it can be very dangerous, and we want to be making sure we're careful. And how do we ride that line of being afraid of it? And as much as possible, I'm trying to teach my children and the children that I am around, that when you're afraid, it puts you in a position of weakness, and it's and not I guess not weakness, but it's not strength, right? So you are susceptible when you're afraid. When you're informed, then you are powerful, and being informed about fire is really important.
Thanks, Heather.
Yeah.
I want to just ask a question of the group, and feel free to put it in the chat. And if anyone wants to share out loud, you're welcome to as well. Thinking about today's presentation and everything that Heather has shared, what is one takeaway that you could apply in your education work? So this hopefully will create kind of a brainstorm of ideas that we could all learn from each other. I'm loving the metaphors. The vacuum, the Costco run, the credit card debt. Great. One thing that you could apply in your education. Yeah, another vote for the vacuum analogy.
That's right. I'm just a big vacuum cleaner with a drip torch.
That sounds way more fun than vacuuming the floor.
It absolutely is. I tell you what, I recently acquired myself a weed burner. It's like a propane torch and it makes a loud noise. Dang, that thing is fun. I have my kids go out there when we burn the weeds.
Great. That's the idea of exposing students to balance.
Yeah, if we can get people out of black and white thinking and say it's always, let's find that, right? And how can we live in the without being in black and white is nice.
Moving away from those dichotomies.
So the carbon produced from prescribed fires, so there's something that we call the fire spiral, where you get large fires, and then you have emissions, and then you have climate, and then you have fires, and whoa, how do you keep on going that? And the best thing we can do is promote fires that are going to burn in such a way that don't burn with such high intensities that they remove more material. And so we can think that perhaps we could just avoid it, but we're facing the music these days that avoidance is a choice. Just like, there's no non-choice here. We choose to not use fire, it's going to come around, and it might come around in a way that we don't want it to. So being in a proactive position where we say, you know what, it's uncomfortable, it's expensive, it's a little bit dangerous, but I'd rather have this than have the alternative, which is the likelihood of a very large scale stand replacement fire, which is where you really get your carbon stuff. So we can use fire to actually eventually increase our carbon stores and our health of our timber and our rangelands. Yeah, because wildfires will happen eventually.
Well, thank you again, Heather. We really appreciate you being with us today. If you are able, and you can turn on your mic for a second to give Heather a round of applause. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And I'm going to go ahead and just share a screen so Augie can tell us about upcoming events.
Yeah, so that was awesome. Again, Heather, thank you so much for doing this for all of us. Just a little about the rest of the Ignite series. So we have 2 more sessions coming up. The next one is going to be Tuesday, April 20th, and that is the session that was postponed. But that is going to be out of the frying pan into the fire. We're going to be talking about invasive species, climate change, and fire in Idaho with Dr. Nagy from the University of Colorado Boulder. And that's, I know for a lot of Boise people, especially, we deal with that, with the cheatgrass and all of that stuff in the sagebrush steppe. So that's going to be a really helpful session for everyone. And then our final session is going to be Tuesday, April 27th, again at the same time of 4 to 5 Mountain Time, or 3 to 4 if you are up north or somewhere in Pacific Time. But that is going to be Fire in My Belly, sharing Idaho's stories of fire in place-based education programs. And I know Tristan and Kayla have really been working on that and creating a storytelling and a really engaging presentation. So that should be excellent as well. If you missed any of the webinars, so our last webinar with Dr. Jen Pierce, or if you want to rewatch this webinar, Kayla is going to post a link in the chat for a recording of those sessions. And also at the end of this series, we'll make sure that all of those recordings are available to you guys to use however you want to use them. And finally, I just want to say that I will send out an invitation for the Tuesday, April 27th event, probably tomorrow morning, and you guys should already have an invitation for the April 20th event. And that's, oh, and if you're not registered, Kayla is also going to post the registration link in the chat as well. And I will encourage you guys to send out that registration link to anyone in your organization who you think would get something from this, from these sessions. We would love to have them, even if they just join us for the last couple sessions. We'd love to have them. So go ahead,
Thanks,
Kayla.
Great. And I just posted all of those, and I just, the final link I posted is to the 5-minute evaluation of this session. We would absolutely love for all of you to just take a couple of minutes to let us know what you thought about the content today and what you would like to see more of in future Earth to Sky webinars or in-person workshops, ideally. So please take a couple of minutes to fill out that evaluation, and we will see you next Tuesday. So thank you all again for being here.